All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming out on this rainy day. But rainy days, I will tell you a little inside secret, is that museums kind of love rainy days. It's a good day to come to a museum, and we always know that from the first, let's say, glorious spring day. That's a good day to be outside, but this is perfect weather to be inside in a museum, and we have a really interesting talk for you today. And I have a really interesting speaker with us today. So my name is Masha Turchinsky. I am the director and CEO of the Hudson River Museum, and I am here with Jonathan Alvarez, who is the founder and CEO of 914 United. And I think we are both proud members of nonprofit Westchester too, aren't we? Okay, so NPW proud while we're at it. So Jonathan and I talked before this program, and we decided rather than going into lengthy bios right now, our conversation is going to reveal a lot of the bio, because what Jonathan is here to talk about is his lived experience and how that turned into his professional experience. So we're not going to do a big long preface. We're going to jump into what is an incredible conversation, an amazing opportunity, and I'm going to preface it with the fact that this conversation stemmed from an event,
an
NPW event here at the Hudson River Museum, and Jonathan and I got to talking in a gallery, and we started to talk about fashion. Mm-hmm. And here we are in 2025. We said we were going to make this happen, and we did.
And you did.
This for me is a really great reminder to always think really expansively about the incredible experiences right in your own community that can bring so much information and augment an exhibition like Nobody's Clothing as Disruptor. So we're going to jump right in. Does that sound good?
That's good.
All right, let's do it. Okay, Jonathan, we are here today to talk about clothing and fashion and the justice system, right, and the criminal justice system. Fashion is where I really want to start, because I know that that is something that didn't just pop into your mind, and it's not the reason that this conversation is just on the fly. Fashion is something that you're deeply interested in. So could you tell us about how fashion, how you became interested in fashion, and from maybe your earliest memories?
Yeah, for sure. So I can remember my interest in fashion as early as being a youth, and as an adolescent in Yonkers. You know, where we from? Can you hear me? I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So my interest in fashion as a youth has just been always wanting to be presentable and look a certain way. Coming from marginal communities, as you learn, what we'll talk about later is fashion is something that we hold really valuable, right? So a nice pair of sneakers is always something I like to have on. But in terms of intellectual interest, it became something different for me. And this is when I was an undergrad, where, and we'll talk about this as we go, for many of you who may not know, I'm formerly incarcerated, served nearly 13 years in state prison from 17 to 30 as a result of gang violence. Came home age of 30 in 2018.
Taking an important tech break here. We want to make sure we hear this experience, right? Absolutely.
Perfect, go ahead. Perfect.
Better,
So,
thank you.
Basically, my intellectual interest with fashion was where, as an undergrad student, I was a part of Bard College, which is a program that is offered inside of New York State prisons, Bard Prison Initiative exactly, where I had the opportunity to actually understand the social significance of prison fashion. And that is where I was motivated, curious to understand why did I like fashion, right? And how it is so important inside of prison culture. So that's where my relationship with fashion shifted, where I took on a more academic lens.
Great. Okay, so now I know you've come prepared with slides. Can we go to the next slide for a moment?
Well, this is the pre-post me.
Yes.
So as I was saying, I'm formerly incarcerated, served 13 years. The power of my story is not that I just served time served me. I went in with no education, returned home with a bachelor's degree from Bard College. I'm currently pursuing my master's degree at Baruch College, my executive MPA. 4.5 years ago, founded with my partner a nonprofit organization called 914 United, which provides mentorship and support services to justice impacted youth here in Westchester. We're partnered with the school district, correctional facilities, detention centers, different agencies. So this is the Jonathan at 17 years old and Jonathan at 33. So interestingly, right, before I was a curious learner of prison fashion. This is where my interest, right?
Yeah.
I began to actually analyze those photos differently. So what you may not know, right, what the naked eye may not see, is that there's 3 different times and periods of my incarceration: 2007, 2010, 2016. What is not so obvious, and clothing has that power because it's sometimes unseen. The messages is that there is I have a legal piece on in each photo, right?
And can you back that up first? How about this? I think you and I talked about this, and a lot of people in the audience may not know. Okay, you enter the criminal justice system, and what happens? In terms of what you're wearing. What happens there before we even jump into the fashion? I know you told me something that was really important.
100%. I was going to touch on that for the third part, but I'll jump into it now. So this goes something else I was sharing earlier. When you're incarcerated and you leave in county jail or Rikers Island, you're going incarcerated in New York State. You're getting sent to Fiscal Correctional Facility. At least at the time when I was incarcerated, that was the process. And you go to what we call downstate, which is a reception. And it's really like a boot camp process, right? So imagine coming from Rikers Island or Westchester County Jail where you're wearing orange gloves, and Rikers Island you're wearing your own personal garments. You're literally going through like a shedding process, right? Where they literally force you to take off your clothing, right? You have to throw it inside of a bin, either donate it, give it away, or mail it home. And then you're stripped down to your boxes. You're lined up with a bunch of men, back to back, and you're told to, you go through a cavity search, and then you're taking a cold shower. So for me, it was really hard. I had really long hair. So remember that photo with the braids? So I'm over here taking my braids out during this process to go under this cold shower so that they can put the light soap and wash me. They're trying to cleanse, right, the body. They're trying to cleanse the incarcerated person coming through the system. And then after the cold shower, you're getting a buzz cut. I had long hair, unless you have religious purpose or reasons to keep your hair. So after that, so now they've given you 3 green piece short sleeve shirts, maybe 3 white cheap cotton t-shirts, boxer socks, a pair of white skippies, a pair of black state boots, we call them state boots, right? And now you look like everyone, right? Everyone has a buzz cut, you're also giving them a number. My number was 078-1922. I know that just like I know my social. So in that process, what I understood through my research too was that there was a stripping of identity and making everyone the same in this downstate reception process. Which makes these photos more significant because, so to talk about the research, it was called Fashion Identity in Prison Culture. It's a slide here that's gonna come up. I was able to look at my real world experiences as a subject of being a fashionista in prison and understand why the prisoners like uphold fashion, right? And what came out of it was like many things, but I exposed certain questions like, why is it important? What meanings do prisoners associate with certain styles of dress? Where does it matter and when? So I interviewed over 25 participants, different age groups, different religions, different, that come from different parts of New York City. And what was framed out this conversation was a debate, the pros and cons of prison fashion, right? So we'll just lean on the pros to relate to these photos where one of the pros is a reclaiming of identity and is a way to resist the assimilation of the prison system, right? So you come into the system and impose this experience. It's a form. It's dehumanizing, right?
And there's an intention to create absolute uniformity, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. So imagine going through that process. I'm 18 years old, right? And this is what I have to wear. I have no choice. Choice is really important when we think about the value of fashion because it becomes agency and a way to push against dominant structures. So here, my brother's here actually, you played a role in this. That's my brother, Johnny. So I was fortunate to have family to come visit me and buy me sneakers. These sneakers are known as the Jordan Retro Lows, right? Were a trendy shoe at the time. Those were not allowed inside of prisons because of the cost. So there's a limitation and restriction with fashion, which also speaks to the systemic just power, right, of docs, right, where you can't get a piece of garment because we think that anything over $50 is going to cause, it's a security issue.
Oh, okay.
So one way individuals would navigate that is basically family would be able to bring sneakers and have a receipt that says it costs $50.
So that's something I didn't know. So there is actually a ticket price, a price point that you're not supposed to exceed.
Price, colors, which these things are going to touch on, right, in terms of how they important. So the sneakers that I have on were basically contraband, right, by the system's definition. And for me, it was nostalgic. It made me feel like who I was with the braids, because I lost that person as I went through the shedding process, right? Thank you, Jada. So yeah, and this is me, 18 years old. I might have been in Sing Sing less than a year at the time. And I'm brandishing my new sneakers, but they mean so much to me. I was excited to wear them because what you learn in my research is that the social symbol it represents for others, it garners respect from the population. You stand out, you are trending, right? You're walking with the status symbol, right? The second photo, this is in 2010. This is what we call a cone head or a champion head. This was also illegal because of the two logos and because there's a restriction on the size of a logo that could be on a garment. Ralph Lauren Polo, for example, was one of the famous brands in prison because of the size of a horse was under a certain inch requirement. So the champion logo defies that. It's also dual logo, and they would not let those through the package room. So I actually had access to that through another friend of mine inside, who I bought it off of. And so this is itself as a hoodie, one may pass it as like, it's a hoodie, right? But for me, it was nostalgic. It also made me feel, it just gave me the sense of identity that I can hold on to and express myself with, that the state cannot take away from me. They cannot control, right? So that photo for me was important because it's that process of resisting and undoing what was done to you as you go through reception.
Now I can see in 2016 there's a blackboard behind you. You're in a classroom environment by that point, huh?
Yes, so this is me in Bard College in Woodburn Correctional Facility. Interestingly enough, you may not identify what's the resistant piece, right? The jacket itself. The jacket was called the chino jacket. 20 years prior to that, it was banned. They no longer made those, what you call the jackets, and gave them out to the population. But newcomers, like myself at the time, compared to people who might have been around during '96, liked the jacket. It was a trendy piece. Some of them were classic. And the way that jacket would be created for someone like myself in 2000, at the time, 7, 8, 10, or whatever year I got it, it would have to be a destruction of state property. So the same jacket that's given in that downstate experience would be destroying it, tailoring it through a tailor, right, which is someone who is really great in tailoring state clothing down to the size and look of what you want. So that same jacket, interestingly enough, there was a whole crackdown in a certain facility where violence is low, correctional staff is bored, and they made that like a target where if you had a chino jacket, you would definitely get an initial behavior report, and it was a form of contraband. So these pieces, as they are just, again, seem to be so mundane and regular, right? The significance that it holds for the individual actually speaks to the larger conversation around how system control bodies, right?
So now I remember that we talked about not everybody can get in, not everybody has family outside who can bring them certain articles of clothing. And so inside the system, there is a tailor, correct?
Yeah. 100%.
And so and I know that there's some interesting, there's a whole currency and negotiation point. And for those, this was all really interesting information for me. Can you tell our audience about the role of a tailor, especially for those who do not have that access of outside goods?
Yeah, no, so like the chino jacket or just wanting certain things created, right? The thing about fashion, it points you into the underground economy in prison, right? There's a whole system, there's stores, there's people who we call the tailor, for example, who you will go to get that chino jacket done. Predominantly they're West Caribbean, Jamaican, or Asian, right? And they're experts, and they literally will be destroying state property to define it and give it its look according to the client. That's a whole money machine for them. They're paying their bills, they're sending money home, right? And what comes with that is a person who's in prison that can't get things from the outside, you would purchase that transaction with what we call like, it's like a form of barter system, but cigarettes, right? So if, you know, it might cost like 2 small cartons of Newports for that chino jacket, for example, right? And then that can get translated to actual real money. So you start to see that people create jobs around the fashion conscious fashionistas, right? Belts are created with certain cities where people are from. So people want to identify themselves, again, reclaiming identity with having on their belt Yonkers, New York, for example, Brooklyn, Harlem. Then it becomes a competition because every borough wants one, right? There's a whole designer creating those belts, ordering the materials from outside, and then being able to create a system behind it.
Did you find that having a particular hoodie or a certain pair of shoes connected you to people, you know, as support systems, as supporters, allies? You know, did you meet people that unexpectedly because of the articles of clothing that you had?
Yeah, so they will be like, so I talk about this in the research as well, right? How fashion unifies, right? So there's times where, one, I observed this, but I myself experienced this, having a pair of Jordans, that I highlighted, right? Coming off the visit, someone who may have just got to the facility would ask me like, how did you get those? Those are like, because they know it's a marker of the time, and they're like, we just got those, how did, like, where did the people go to get them, and how to get the receipt done? Conversation starts to be created, and you get to just recognize somebody in that way where that might become a friend. I think there's also like a silent nod for each other who are fashionistas. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That right. So you kind of have a knowing glance. So like, I see you've got that, and I, you know, yeah. So you made a decision. Not the Barred Prison Initiative is there, but not everybody can do it, and not everybody takes them up on the offer. What was that moment where you realized that education was going to be pivotal in your life experience?
I mean, I think early on I kind of was a curious learner, so I knew education was my thing, but it really was when I knew Bard College was affording this free liberal arts education. FYI, a degree is $258,000, right, that they were giving to us for free. So the market value, right, was something that I would wanted to go after. And then it was in certain facilities at the time that you had to transfer there, so it was real exclusive.
Yeah, it's an excellent school.
Yeah. So that period for me was in 2013, right before that first ethnographic research on prison fashion.
And so I know we want to move through, but I wanted to make sure that people learned about ultimately the ethnographic exhibition that you put together. Do you want to tell people a bit about that exhibition? That's your senior thesis and what you worked on?
So there's a buildup in my history with fashion, right? So being a fashionista before incarceration was where my relationship began. But then the ethnographic research kind of opened up my mind, right, to what fashion can mean for people, right, inside of marginalized spaces or carceral environments. So I had to take a step back because here's where my real fashion interest really evolved. So now I'm a senior in Bard. I'm graduating, and one of the requirements to produce a senior thesis. This is could be 5 to 6 page project, 2-year independent research on a topic of interest. Interestingly, I wasn't going to do fashion. I had a different idea in mind, but the hoodie, which we saw in the opening, was a big thing around 2015 because of the Trayvon Martin, with the death of Trayvon Martin. And there was a big conversation around that. So being incarcerated, being intrigued by the social event, I wanted to tie in the meaning of the hoodie and all of the associations that were with it. But in my research, I'm reading a bunch of cultural anthropology, literature, history, produced ultimately what I focused on, which was the significance of what we call ghetto fashion, right? And the title was called "The Dialectic Between Ghetto Fashion and Structural Violence, a Never Ending for Power and Capital." I basically was able to understand that the fashionista that I was as a youth, there's a history behind why and how that happened. So why we in racially segregated and economically marginalized communities value material consumption. And what I identified was the origin of ghetto fashion, which was in 1916 as black Americans were fleeing the Jim Crow South, where they didn't have the luxury or the freedom to express themselves. New York and Chicago was using that time as a way to come up to New York, obviously, to work and help the industries, but it was a way to say you can actually express yourself. This is where you can be you. So blacks at the time identified through my research in Chicago, we start to see Black Americans who were in racially segregated, economically disadvantaged communities dressing outlandishly. So it was very interesting that this becomes their form of agency in a white dominant society.
And in a redlined society.
Redline, right? So then what I started to trace was this phenomenon in different places, right? 1920s Harlem, right? Blacks were dressing in zoot suits. It was interesting. So my definition of ghetto fashion has three different factions, right? Three different, I guess, you could define it three different ways. One is that it's radical, right? It can take a conventional dress code intentionally, like the zoot suit, speaking to white culture, and intentionally defy it. It was an exaggerated look of a two-piece suit, but that was intentional. We've seen that happening with Mexican Americans in the 1940s, right? Where they were marginalized and they used the zoot suits as a way to articulate their forms of expression. And that's when we might have known the 1943 zoot suit riots, right? And then we start to trace it through 1980s, right? As we know, mass incarceration, and simultaneously too, between that 1900s to 1940s period, ghettoization is taking place too. They're constructing ghettos in America, right? So this is all happening. So ultimately what I come to understand that when we see a young Black or Latino, right, in the marginalized community dressed a certain way, there's a history to that. And one thing I was able to understand was the criticism, right? So I contended with an anthropologist called Oscar Lewis with the critique on culture of poverty that blamed people from marginalized communities for perpetuating their poverty. But what I argued through my research was that through fashion, we see that there's this conversation happening with structural oppressive forces that is somehow creating a reaction from certain groups who is trying to gain back agency, and those groups are the ghetto fashionistas using fashion, and trends are birthed out of that. But what we also see, which is a big thing today, is that, and this is, well, let me just dial back to the second part of the definition of ghetto fashion, where fashion is not just radical, but it's also appropriated. So we see that with this group here, where they're taking Ralph Lauren brand, which was not meant for them. This is a group in 1985 called the Lowlifes from Brownsville, Brooklyn, and maybe different parts of Brooklyn. They were subculture. They were violently stealing polo clothing so that they can redefine what it meant for them and feel that they tap into that part of the American dream, right? Interestingly enough, they're called the Lowlifes. So their play on that concept of lowlife means differently for them, but they appropriated Ralph Lauren's brand. Then the third aspect of ghetto fashion as identified is a famous example that many may know is Off-White, where fashion could be exclusionary, where it's actually like, we might have heard of FUBU, for us, by us, right? That's exclusion from mainstream, intentionally through fashion, right? But everything is showing that there's a structured agency thing happening here, and you'll understand the individual when the marginalized community is dressed a certain way, there's a bigger conversation happening. So I gave a new perspective on fashion. I tie it to the social structures historically, right? So we better understand somebody that we will see dressed in ghetto fashion today. I address some of these questions here, like, you know, what value do distinctive, if not outlandish styles have within economically marginalized communities, right? Why has the flamboyant manner of dress become a staple in ghetto culture? Why? It's the biggest question. And how did it materialize as an urban phenomenon? And I think ultimately for me, it was to really understand how oppressive forces actually inspires creativity, right? And trends are birthed out of that. But the chapter ends with it's a question that you may have: who wins in this transaction? Who wins in this battle? Because what Ralph Lauren did as a result of the Lowlives was hire his first male Black model, Tyson Bedford, in 1990. Now he's co-opting the same thing that they created for their agency for his own economic capital. So there's a struggle between power and capital between both factions. And we've seen this happening today with Christian Dior. They have sneaker versions now. It's a thing in street culture. These high-end brands that never created things are now catering to the same population that is trying to tap in, but they do it obviously with financial interest.
I have a question for you. How did 30-year-old Jonathan feel about 17-year-old Jonathan in terms of all the things you didn't know when you were 17, and then you went and delved into this research? What did it feel like to accomplish this and think back to that young person?
It's a big question you dropped on me right there. So, I mean, one was just realizing how I never really valued education, right? And how my view was so limited of the world, right? At 30 years old, having done so much research, and I now see things as multi-layered, right? Which fashion is multi-layered. There's a lot of layers to everything. So when I see certain events now, when I see certain things that one may write off as regular or original, I'm looking at the deeper complexities. So my mind has kind of been trained from 17 to 30 to see things beyond what is shown, seeing things beyond what the naked eye might miss.
And I believe what's coming up that we talked about was some time at Parsons?
Yes.
Yes, okay, so now we're heading over to the new school at Parsons.
Yes, for sure. So basically, as I was saying, my history with fashion is constantly emerging. So as a result of that thesis, I returned home in 2018. I'm motivated. I wanted to be a fashion curator. That was my interest returning home in 2018. And my first approach was go for the best school in New York. And I applied to Parsons. I wanted to curate basically I wanted to translate my senior thesis into exhibition. That was my main interest. So we can actually bring a different perspective on street fashion, ghetto fashion. I applied to the new school. I was awarded nearly a full scholarship within 2 months of being home. And that right there was an eye-opener because going into the school, I'm still on parole, I'm still being policed by the system. But I'm moving through my journey, and here you see me at the new school, really, really working there. I just had somebody take a picture. But simultaneously, while prepping for school, I was fortunate to land a job at Spring Studios where they do major production events, multi-million-dollar events. And here I was participating, supervising an event by Vogue. You know, Vogue's a big production. So this is me I seen like a bunch of famous actors that day, right? So this is me gaining real insight. But ultimately, as my story tells it, it was in Parsons where my transition to 914 United actually happened. Home less than 10 months, at the point of my breakdown, I was broke because I'm still paying for transportation from Yonkers to the city. Both jobs I had were not, giving me enough income. And I had my first mental health breakdown, right, in 2019. And as I say this often, right, I learned to say no to education, yes to mental health. It's one of the famous things I like to say. And fortunately for me, I had a group of friends and family to reach out to and let them know that I'm vulnerable, I'm going through it. Long story short, that support system that I had made me realize that many coming back to Westchester from incarceration don't have. So we organized our first male support group called the You're Not Alone Brotherhood. And that was my first time organizing, right, to help, to do something good, right, with my story. As a result of leaving Parsons, simultaneously, what's interesting though, before I get to this part, is before I left, a colleague of mine who I shared that ethnographic research with, she says, hey, there's an opportunity with the arson, there's like a department in Parsons to do an exhibition. Your project will be a perfect idea. And out of like 120 applicants, 6 months later, we actually got chosen to do the exhibition, even though I'm leaving Parsons. So now I'm building 914 United with my team, and then, in 2012, I co-curated clothing inside, addressing American prisons. And what's interesting is that we centralized the human experience here. For us, it was giving viewers, what does it feel like to be incarcerated? This exhibition didn't just touch on fashion, it touched on commodities. It looked at men and women. It looked at how LGBT communities have to engage with this oppressive environment. One of the things I showed here highlighted in the exhibition was the reclaiming of that identity. But this was my first attempt at being a curator.
What was that experience like what did you learn in your in the curation experience?
That Parsons is limited in thinking. Yeah, different ideologies. We clashed about this. We had limited resources, small budget, and that there was so much to do but could not be done here. So one of my long-term goals was to have like a bigger space, right? And show the different parts. I couldn't show the underground economy. So one thing I did want to highlight about that was this concept of the Iron Man. some of us want him, know, right? Where in Eastern Correctional Facility, for example, see, jobs are created as a result of fashion interest in prison. That's the point. Where if I'm met with a choice to have to get on the phone and call my loved ones, but also get my clothes ready for the visit the next day, there's an iron man where you pay stamps and he's gonna iron your clothes. So you can kill two birds in one stone, right? So how to like illustrate that would be so important to show how people are literally surviving off of those roles in prison. We couldn't do a lot of that here, right? But this was our first attempt. It was with two colleagues of mine, one who graduated the program at the time and was about to graduate. I was the one that withdrew. And so this is where fashion last left off for me in terms of my intellectual interest until today. So I was super excited about being here. But as I mentioned, the transition for me was super pivotal because I take all of that experience, right, and I incorporate it in the work that we do with 914 United in different ways, right? As I mentioned, we are on the front lines. Shout out to my team, some of them are here, of providing support and mentorship services to justice impacted youth, gang involved with at-risk youth in Westchester. And one of the things I'm really proud about our work is the spaces, safe spaces and the education that we're actually giving them about their unique circumstances. Our mission statement is to expose, educate, and empower. This is the Leaders Lab, and our 4-year anniversary, we secured our first location on Central Park Avenue, right? Here we're hosting all of our services and programs from civic engagement, financial literacy, career readiness, the list goes on. Here's where we disrupt gun violence prevention. Here's where we determine gang involvement. Here's where we increase in employment for people who have no access. Most importantly for me was recently what we did for this gala. November 20th, it was called the Sneaker Gala. We did it 2 years straight. Each year had over 430 people present from different walks of life, different parts of Westchester, commissioners to senators, right, name it, they were there. What we did for me was really great was that concept, changing the narrative as it relates to fashion was what we really did that really felt good, was where we're not only changing the narrative about what it means to be formerly incarcerated in Westchester, right, we also want to show how that looks. So we took a group of our youth and we bought them suits, 2-piece suits. So we pointed out how
that's right, we talked about this.
It's a conformity, right, piece, but it's also symbolic because one of our youth recently used his prior 2-piece suit from the last gala for his job interview. See, sometimes it's about the small things that provide access. So we took a bunch of youth, one individual came in and he did almost 15 years in the feds, federal penitentiary. And he came to me at the gala and said, yo, I was crying earlier because my daughter fixed my bow tie. He had a moment with his daughter fixing his bow tie. So sometimes these things have so much more meaning than we can even understand. So one of the key things I would say that I learned was the power of lived experiences. It's a form of currency that has so much exchange value.
My mom used to say, get your education because no one can take it from you. And it's the same with lived experiences, right?
Yes, this is my.
And I think that's a really interesting comment you made about the suit because it deviates from that idea of being totally unique to aspiring to a particular article of clothing that is a uniform, right? A business suit is a uniform in a certain way. But I am noticing that you've added a little spiciness. You've got the red tie, and you've got a little handkerchief popping out and everything. So
a little jazz.
A little jazz.
But
a little jazz.
The key thing I think for us to the mission and how clothing, right, is we like to emphasize to the youth the power of code switching, right? Code switching, right, is being able to navigate and be flexible like a chameleon in different spaces. And while the conventional 2-piece suit is something that's been in our culture for so long, it's dominant. It's a dominant piece. You have to know how and when how to use that. And I think educating our youth and people of diversifying. I'm a big component of diversity, so I always say you have to have at least two-piece suits in your closet, then have sweatsuits in and everything else. And we emphasize that the importance. So when they throw that on, you have to see the expression, the euphoria that comes from that, right?
So now, in your role at 914 United, which provides incredible support for young people and also gives them guidance to make better choices about their lives, because while certainly lived experience matters, we want the best lived experiences, right? You want to learn from your best lived experiences. What kind of conversations now through your own journey from 17 to now. What do you find resonates the most with young people, especially when we talk about this concept of clothing and materialism and fashion and how they feel? Do they feel that they need it to portray a certain aspect of who they are? What kind of conversations do you find kind of coursing through the discussions of young people in 2025?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think being culturally relevant and fluid, right, with fashion, with mannerism, presentation, right, the youth will respect that you are from a different era, but you understand their era, right? You have certain pieces that they recognize and respect. Being culturally relevant with the language, with the fashion trends, not to say to look like them, but being aware, right? Because that's a conversation starter. And it also shows that you're actually still understanding the market that you're working in. So we want to always advocate for leaders and professionals, know your market as a professional, do your research and innovate. Times change with the time, right? So sometimes you might have a certain set of values, but you might have to challenge that. So being culturally relevant requires us as credible messengers on the front line to understand the youth and their current experiences. When we tap into that, it's just that connection, that we hear them, we see them, and that we are what they call in tune. We're in tune.
Now I remember you also a mentor for My Brother's Keeper, right?
Yes, I was with them for some time, still a partner with MBK, but now, yeah.
And where else so does 914 mostly function as a place that people go to, or do you also kind of bleed out into the community and tap into places where youth may not, if they don't know about you already, do you go out and do outreach?
Yeah, so just about the work. So right now, currently, this year, we in 4 locations. So we are partnered with Westchester County Department of Corrections. That's where we have our programs happening. We in more than 1 unit now. We started with 1 unit, now we in more than 1. We also partner with Children's Village, specifically Woodfield Detention Center, working with the young incarcerated youth who are under 18. And in the Westchester County, the jail, the youth are 18 to 24, and they just push that population to 26. So we're there every week running programs, trying to strengthen the re-entry services when they come out of those institutions to our community. We're also at the Leaders Lab, so now that we have a place to call home, we're working on centralizing all of those services. And we also take people who come home from federal prisons, state prisons, they come to our office now. Our office is where we have now on a rotating schedule, different services, different programs happening. And in our 4th location, which is a new service, shout out to my partners here today, we'll be at the Fitness Factory, a local fitness gym where we'll be launching a fitness and wellness program.
Where's that?
It's in downtown Yonkers.
Okay.
Yeah, it's literally by the DMV, like in that
Oh,
building.
yes, okay.
Yeah,
Yes,
so
okay.
through their partnership, they allowing us to run a fitness program there. So we're diversifying our locations, but outreach is happening all the time. And they always finding us, so sometimes the outreach is not needed.
Yes. So we're going to now pivot over to some questions, but I'm going to start with my own. This is for selfish reasons. I want to know, as we think about No Bodies, Clothing as Disruptor, do you have one article of clothing that has mattered to you more than any other in your life?
One article of clothing, like currently right now in my closet.
Anytime was it? I don't want to feed it to you, but meaning, is there, maybe not one, maybe not the only one, but is there one that you say to yourself, I will never forget that article of clothing?
That's a good question. I'm trying to think, that one article of clothing.
I'm going to ask you this one while you think of it. How did it feel the day that those sneakers arrived from your brother? I'm just curious.
Nostalgic. Oh, that feeling?
Yeah, I'm just curious what.
I was excited. I can't wait to like brandish this. I'm like, cause I was super excited. The kid in me came out. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have like that one article I can think of. That's why it's probably hard for me to think about that resonates. I'm always like looking for new fashion pieces, so maybe I'm moving on too fast. But I always look at my 2-piece suits as something, right? I'm a favor of 2-piece suits. I think even in my men group, a lot of them, I'm like the go-to for some of tailoring. Where can I get a nice 2-piece suit? So for me, it's that connecting piece. So I'll say the 2-piece suit.
Okay, the 2-piece suit. Okay, so what I'd like to do is open this up to 1 or 2 questions, and then after, what I'd like to do is invite everyone to join Jonathan and myself over in No Bodies, Clothing as Disruptor, and we're going to continue that conversation with several key pieces. So who would like to ask Jonathan a question first? Okay, yes, please. And what I'd like to do is, if you wouldn't mind, maybe we pass the mic, or do we?
No, I'm loud, you don't need it.
You can do it? Okay, all right.
I hope my question makes sense, but as far as fashion goes, there's hierarchies, right? Low income, middle class, high end, 1%ers. And what they wear is a big part of their presentation and how you receive them, right? Because you have preconceived notions about somebody who's rocking all Gucci or is not, right? So in prison, for those that had support and could go to the tailor and could go to the person who ironed their shirt, versus those that couldn't, was there any kind of differences in the way they were treated or who they hung out with, or like, did the economics that way?
That's a good question. No, it's the person, like the have-nots, more or less, right?
Yeah, like, you know.
I mean, they might be the one who become the predator.
That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some examples, yeah, right? Yeah, there'll be those who are gonna take. So something I should say that I know some would know, at a certain time in prison, you couldn't wear jewelry unless you was violent, right? So the people who didn't have would take as a result of asserting their masculinity, their hyper masculinity, right? That was a big thing. Having a chain was an actually dangerous element at one point. I think that changed like in after 2000s, but I think everybody had a chain at one point. But yeah, so I think about that as an example of when one does not have, right? But in terms of how they perceive differently, I think they're able to make it work. I never touched on that part of the research, so I don't want to talk too much on that, but I think as humans, we're gonna make it work, right? And also there's other factors that defines a person's identity in prison. Fashion is one aspect of it. Mm-hmm. So he might be somebody that's well respected because he has a nice knuckle game, right? Fashion ain't gonna take nothing away from him, right? So those things matter. So it's I think the respect factor is based on many things. And the point I was saying, fashion has a certain way that is tied into that. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't take it away from the person who, you know, and depict them as like a vulnerable person because they ain't got fashion, you know. I'll be overspeeding.
Okay, that's quite a very good question, thank you.
Very good.
Yes, actually, I'm sorry, there was someone, I see one there, and then we can go to that. Yes?
Here's what I've been counting. That's a question. I'm a fellow Bardian, I know him from...
We travel together.
I'm so proud of him, I'm so amazed with what he's doing, and I love him pointing out that injustice and inequalities in our communities have a lot of intersectionalities.
Yes.
Within the culture of it, and fashion is one, and there's a lot of them. My question, I was thinking, there's a lot of performativity in prison. You know, fakies and suckers, whatever. How much of it goes to that? And the scarcity of the resources by which you got to do fashion with. Everything's very limited, right? How much of it contributes to the performativity of the individual in prison and acting in that hyper-violent, hyper-masculine environment? Does that make sense?
No, it's a great question because I think about me when I was in Sing Sing and the impact that had on a young 18-year-old coming from Yonkers, New York, was you're feeling like you have to keep up with the Joneses. And unfortunately, that performativity, right? You feel like you need this to kind of be respected. You need this to fit in and kind of be perceived in a good way. So I think what we see is people privatizing that as a mode of survival, right? And then that has its own consequences because then it's leaning on your family's pockets. So there's another aspect there. But yeah, I feel that some are compelled, motivated, right? To perform, to keep up with this culture. Because again, as we said, fashion for some was a way to respect others. And if we understand that's my means of gaining respect, maybe I'm not a fighter, but I'm gonna gain respect for looking good. That means I'm gonna prioritize getting a haircut. I'm gonna prioritize looking good in the yard. So it becomes a way that they survive. So performativity is actually, you know, how it's read, it's a skill set, right? It's a way to navigate that hyper-violent environment. And I think fashion is a way to make it easier for some people who can't do it.
Thank you, very good question. Yes, and then after that.
My question is, first of all, thank you for the excellent presentation. And my question is, have you or someone else approached anybody to do a film on your life? Because I feel that it is very compelling. You're dealing with fashion, as you said, is one layer, but yet the education that you had at Bard College is another layer, and unfortunately, youth today can be stuck in the celebrity lens and not realize how much work you went through. So I guess my question is, and my hope, there should be a movie on your life similar to the movie that is on Sing Sing with Shakespeare. This would help young people, and finally, I would just say, I hope you approach the Yonkers schools to make sure you meet with all the students. This was outstanding, and I thank the Hudson River Museum. Excellent.
So to that question, I would love to make a movie. In fact, for me, to be selfless, I want to actually produce an HBO series on Netflix on this topic, specifically on street fashion and ghetto prison fashion. So yeah, I'm hoping we can get the support of connections to make that happen. It's one of my goals.
Wonderful. Contact Richard Helmy, right down in Lionsgate.
There you go. So you heard that, folks. Okay. And yes, you have a question.
Hi, yes, first of all, thank you so much for this program. This has been great. And Jonathan, I want to say thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you.
Your story is so touching, and I feel like so often people don't understand each other because people are not willing to share their stories, especially more vulnerable parts as you are. And so I just want to say thank you for doing that.
Thank you so much.
I have about 10,000 things I'd love to ask you, but I'm going to choose one. I'm not actually sure, it might be too weird. If it is, you don't have to answer it. That one slide where you had the 3 images of you, at your 3 different stages. Yeah. So one thing I noticed is your body posture. And it just made me think about, when your clothing is limited, does your body posture, I mean, obviously everyone's body carriage is always like part of your thing, but does it change in prison? Does it get more affected, or, I don't know, anything in that universe that you care to talk about?
So interesting, I think 2 points that I say. I think, especially with the hoodie, right? I'll say that having that hoodie on kind of influenced my demeanor for the image, because it reminded me of the past life I was in. So posture might play the role in how when I'm putting this hoodie on, putting a coat head, I'm flipping that first part of the hoodie. It may actually play a part on how I position myself in the photo.
Right.
So I would say certain pieces may do that in certain contexts. Here, not so much. I think I was taking a photo. But to your point, Rich, right, what's interesting is that I'm like postured up here, and I knew the cameras was on me. So I was performing it. It's in terms of posture and bodily movements and mannerisms, it's really about who's watching.
Yeah.
I think that's key when it comes to fashion, like who's present. And interestingly, in prison, everybody's watching. Think about the surveillance system. It's not your peers, it's correctional staff. So, yeah.
PS2.
We have time.
PS2.
Yeah. We have time for one more question. Anyone who, maybe someone who's not been to the museum. Oh, here we go. I see. Mayor.
I wanted to know if you could just say a little bit more about how fashion helped address the mental health component that you talked about. It strikes me you really went into a lot about how entering the prison is an erasure of identity, and then coming out, it seems to me that that fashion has potential, at least, can help people get their identity back. Can you just talk a little bit more about that in your own experience?
No, thank you for that. Because part of the research, there's a segment, like, it's funny, it's in the Netflix now, but it's called Fashion Euphoria. So what I was able to kind of like pull out from participants was how they felt with that Ralph Lauren with the Jordans on their feet, the sense of esteem that helps them cope with the reality. Waking up every day, right? There was that connection that I also teased out. But more importantly was also how it made their family feel, right? So if they was to go to a visit room, not dressed a certain way, haircut looking, family would feel that the system is breaking them. So it's through fashion that they uphold the sense of esteem and confidence and show their loved ones like, I'm okay. So that also was teased out in how some husbands will really go above and beyond to look good for their wife, right? And to articulate that unheard message that I'm okay, right? My mental health is intact. But interestingly though, there's that I was calling a positive fallacy in my research. Because you're really not okay, right? So there's that other part of the conversation where you're really oppressed every day, you're experiencing violence every day, right? So, but fashion plays that role, right? So, you know, who to say which way it leans, I don't know, but it does have that effect where you might not be okay realistically, but you're able to cope. And for some people, fashion, like art, like the nobodies, right, is a way to help resist, cope, and express. Thank you.
Okay, and I think we have one last question.
It was just me.
Oh, she had her hand up, too.
As a curator, I
Yes.
could not help wondering, and I realize this might be difficult, but do you still have your sneakers?
Oh, those? Those are old.
Such a curator question, she wants to maintain the collection.
I
right,
wish,
okay.
you know, I didn't have that agency to keep some things. Yeah, those are long gone. I think she had her hand up. I don't want to mess up. I'm sorry.
Oh, yes.
Your talk brought up so many thoughts for me, but one of them was that the Museum of Natural History has recognized that bling can turn into art, and that they have a great exhibit of the bling of rap artists. And it shows, and when I saw it, I was really stunned because it really shows that things that people do to express their individuality, their money, their status in the rap world or in any world can still become art, because at a certain point it changes and it's no longer tied to that person and what they're doing, but it becomes something else in itself. And this reminded me about that. So I appreciate that. I also want to say that I worked in a hospital for many years, and one year the cleaning staff went from wearing, they changed the clothing that the cleaning staff were wearing. I don't know who initiated that, but they went from wearing ugly maroon and green shirts to wearing black. And when you saw them in the halls, it was like, they look good because they're wearing black, which is a fashion color. And I thought that was so wonderful that they had a chance to participate in what everybody wants to look like, which is good. Everybody wants to look good, but for 8 hours of their day, they had to wear these awful colors for, I don't know what reason, it's just tradition, but the tradition changed. And I think it really, it helped me to know that the cleaning staff looked good.
Thank you. Yes, I think you're right. I think it does matter. I think no matter what your life circumstances are, most people would say they want to project the best version of themselves, right? And the choices of the articles of clothing that we put on our body help us convey that, telegraph that. Before we head over to the exhibition, Jonathan, do you have any closing thoughts about this journey? I know it's not over. That idea, that role of fashion, heading into education and now supporting a new generation to help ensure that they don't have to learn certain lessons through maybe certain lived experiences and can choose others. What are any parting thoughts for our audience?
That it truly takes a village. I think the power of what we show with the events is the diversity that's supporting us, right? The diverse groups. And we're calling on to expand that community. These youth need us, right? And we need you, right? So I always want to make that connection clear, that at the baseline of our work is a human experience that we're trying to change. And we're calling for partners, supporters, to help us further that mission so we can help more youth, expose them to more things. So just understanding who I was and the opening of this image, right? We're trying to multiply that individual by 1,000, right? We want to make not Jonathan the exception, but the norm. And we need your help for that.